one or maybe two updates about Elsa 3. And Frans, did you have anything to share about some of the research you've been doing?
Yeah, I have done it. I was running the algorithm to see whether or not it was working, but maybe we can discuss the workflow that I created to see if I have all the edge cases in there, or if we can think of other edge cases that need to be handled in that one. You, Jay, it's about parallel execution and the expectancy that you have from a workflow to have it like execute multiple times or execute it once when you have a split and a fork, for instance. We can discuss that a bit. I think the algorithm works, but I have no proof for that yet, but other than the confidence in myself,
Well,
that's not enough, I guess.
that should get you far away, but yeah, well, would be good to give it a try. I think Mohammed offered to help in this area. Maybe he wants to implement it in the flowchart activity to give it a
Okay.
try. So that would be great. Yeah, great. So those are two topics. Let me just dive into the Elsa 3 updates. So last week we discussed this flowchart execution. We also talked about flow decision and other flow type of activities. At that point, I was working on the switch activity, which, as you may know, lets you add cases. And that wasn't fully working last week, but now it should be good. So if you add a few cases, you can actually go into an individual case and then implement that case. So here, for example, I add a write line to case one, and then here I can add a read line to case two. And you can add as many cases as you like. But we also talked about, these are more like sequential activities. And we talked about what if you want flow style activities like the flow decision, which has a true and a false outcome. And we now also have one for the flow switch, which behaves similar to the switch activity, but in that you can add a bunch of cases. But instead of seeing these ports embedded in the activity, they will appear on as an actual outcome like true and false. So in this case, there's a little bug. So I broke something, but you can imagine there will be multiple little bulbs appearing to the right side or the bottom of this activity. And then you can connect additional activities. So that works. Almost. And then the current thing that I'm working on is reusable or custom activities that you can configure. Yeah, so as I was saying, the current feature I'm working on is custom activities, and there's a different set of categories that could entail a custom activity. Of course, you can write one in C sharp, but what I'm working on is using the designer where you basically create a new flowchart, but it will be stored as an activity definition. And then the idea is that you can have your custom activities appear in the activity browser here, in the activity picker, and then drag and drop them. So these would be like mini workflows, but they would be actually part of the main workflow, so they would not themselves be separate workflows. It's not done yet, but you can imagine there will be a custom activity menu item here, or probably it will be called activity definitions as one type of custom activities. I'm also thinking about having another section for custom activities created through the creation of JavaScript or other syntaxes that you can use, where you use JavaScript or Python or whatever we want to support to implement an actual activity instead of having only C# as the option to create custom activities in code. I wanted to show the progress of that, but there's been some refactoring, so it's not in a good state right now. So unfortunately, there's nothing for me to show at this point.
Question regarding the switch.
Sure.
A switch is a bit different than if and else and so on. Is a switch also that it can execute multiple cases when multiple cases are valid, or is it always being one?
It's up to what we decide that we think makes sense. So the switch that I have here, I try to model it more or less as close as possible to the C# and JavaScript switch interpretation, in which case it means only, well, the first case that evaluates to true will be executed. But technically, we could also execute any branch or any activity associated with a port that evaluates to true. So it's up to us. What do you think would make sense for a switch activity?
And the funny part is that I now are thinking about how the implementation in C# is. If you don't use a break, does it then fall back to the next case that is valid? Or
Yeah, if you don't use break or return, then it's that set of cases. If either one or the other case is true, then whatever statement or block below comes next will be executed. So you could have multiple cases that evaluate to true.
Hello.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, this is my first session I'm joining, and I think I can add to that switch case thing of how I think is a pretty cool way that it could or is currently working. Sorry, I haven't had an opportunity to actually play with Elsa enough, but my experience lies in other workflow engines, and something that works really well is if the lines are seen as any and all logical flows. So if whatever comes before a line is true, then that line will or should run. And then anything that comes after that line should execute if this line equates to true. I don't know if that is relevant.
Yeah, so you're saying, if I understand correctly, let's take this example here. I have a switch and I have three cases. The first one evaluates to true, the second one to false, the third one to true. So are you saying then that means both case one and case three should execute?
Correct. I think so.
Okay.
If we take this to a live example, let's say it's a purchase order. Let's say, it also has three lines. If it's beneath $50,000, if it's above $50,000, and then if it's above 100,000, then also let the manager know. Send them an email. Then if something is above 50,000, then the second line will execute. If it's above 100,000, then the second line and the third line should execute. And yeah, I think that's how all lines at least should work. It should function the same way logic in C# works on any logical argument. If it's true, then it flows.
Yeah, I'm trying to map this to a C# switch construct. And there you can have multiple cases adjacent to one another. And if they don't have a body, they basically allow you to implement different conditions that map to a certain action to take. Maybe we can do a quick example here. So here I have two conditions. And if either one is true, then it will perform this statement. And if this one is true, it will perform that statement. Maybe it's not an exact match because these are expressions that evaluate to true, and this statement is more like it needs to match this thing. Or maybe with switch expressions since C# at 9, I believe, you can have more elaborate conditions. But to me, it seems to be similar. So in that case, maybe you're right, and it should be that any condition here that evaluates to true should yield the next action or the next activity.
Yeah, I agree to that.
And the
Could
only
it be
thing
interesting to, sorry,
No, continue, Jay.
yeah, maybe could it be interesting to have the ability to, with a checkbox, to allow to break? And if we do this, we have to use an order for the different condition.
I think that's the case in Elsa 2, I mean.
And I think if we have the checkbox with a break and the ability to change the order of the condition, the switch is a full feature.
What do you think, Cody, about that?
Well, I just took a look at the. Sorry, I'm sitting on my cell phone.
Oh, no
I'm
worries.
from South Africa, and we have power outages. So I'm sitting on my phone, and I just went through documentation of how the previous engines that I worked on with how it functions. And an activity has a set. An event has a set of activities inside of it, and that could be the preceding rule, the actual activities, and then the post rule. So a preceding rule, does it wait for certain dates? Does it wait for another process? Whatever that blocks it from continuing. Then it assigns it to if it has a destination role where it goes, and then it initializes the activities. So that would be email events, data source update, transactions, and then it has its hard-coded values, which would be a loop or if conditions or switch cases and so on. Then when that little block completes, it itself as an object called a smart object is aware of all activities, preceding and post rules, and all values where it equates to. The lines connected to that activity is then essentially like little listeners. They just look for a specific value and see if that equates to true, and then they execute. So I'm not too sure if telling a block this is a switch case. I'm not too sure. Sorry, I don't have context of where this is going. Then maybe I can give better input.
Sure, yeah, no worries. So let me try and explain. So in Elsa 3, we have this switch activity, which is new for Elsa 3. And we try to determine the correct or the expected behavior or the behavior we think makes sense. And we talked about maybe it makes sense for any and all cases that evaluate to true to schedule the next activity. So the way this switch here works, if case 1 evaluates to true and case 3 as well, and both the activity in case 1 and the activity in case 3 should be scheduled scheduled for execution. But in Elsa 2, we also have a switch activity, and it can behave in the same way, but that behavior is controlled by a property called mode. And there's two options for this mode. It's either match first or match any. So the user gets to control whether they want the first match to schedule the activity and ignore any potential other matches, or match any, which will basically schedule all matching activities to execute next. So the question is, should we allow the user to control this behavior, or would it not make sense?
Hey, please stop me if I'm heading in the wrong direction. I'm only going to suggest things that I think I understand. So I think giving the user the ability to configure a switch case, I mean, for as a developer, that would make sense. But I think that would force someone to always use a switch case then in the event that, it has more than just a true or a false. Then you'd always have to add a switch case in the event that he would like to start a sub process, parallel process, or even just a split in the current workflow that has more than two lines.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the direction that you're heading in, then yes, I think it should definitely work this way. I think it's going in the right direction then.
Yeah, at least it gives the options. We could always consider allowing the implementer, the developer, to configure if this is an available option to the users or not, but we will have to see. But maybe for now, giving these options makes sense. Then we can gather some feedback once it's used by actual users to see if it's too complicated or if there's other complaints about that. And of course, it's not the only way to split the execution into multiple branches. The switch allows you to split into one or more branches using these expressions, but from any outcome here, from any port, you can add, or you can create multiple connections like here and here. But in this case, you don't control which connections are evaluated next, because they will all be evaluated. So from this flow switch example here, the write line will be scheduled as well as the flow decision here. Both will execute next. And the switch or the flow switch allows you to control what cases to evaluate next, or to evaluate and which one, the ones evaluating the true, will execute next. And of course, maybe we can come up with other useful constructs in the form of separate additional activities that we can get some inspiration from other engines.
I actually had that question today regarding that switch. They were designing a workflow and they said, now I have to do an if and then an if and then an if, because it can evaluate to multiple items. I'd rather have a switch which makes the workflow way nicer to see, just having a lot of ifs in sequence after one another. But they opted for in Elsa 2 it was mode match any, leave the match first approach.
Okay, good. Let me just take some notes.
But I like the idea as well that you also can have the checkbox that you could say, well, after this one, break always, or stop evaluating or something like that. That you have even more control. You say match any, but if this case is happening, then just stop.
So you're saying to have a mode or behavior control that lets you specify whether to match any case or match the first one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, got it. All right, very cool. Cody, since this is your first attendance, let me just briefly introduce you. Cody is managing our Elsa Discord server. He's responsible for creating assigning these nice little icons and organizing the things. So thanks for doing that. That's improving the Discord experience, I think, a lot.
Yeah, that's no problem. I like doing these kind of things. Also, I think Elsa is going to be pretty damn awesome as soon as she keeps growing. And I think she'll only keep growing if you collect enough cool people to help that happen.
That's definitely helpful. Absolutely. It's a big project, and I appreciate all the help I can get on this. And
does anybody have any experience in creating Discord bots? Because I found a lack of support bots. For instance, all these questions that we get in Discord, if we can have a thing that can listen for questions and it could suggest to the user, would you like to create a thread or use an actual bot to create an issue, then you can export that directly to GitHub or Reddit or even to a document or an Excel spreadsheet, anything like that. So you can at least have things, well organized, because currently it's all over the chat.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so my nephew told me once that it should be possible to build a knowledge base based on information that we provide. So somebody, let's say somebody asks a question, I answer the question. What I should do is put that question in some wiki, for example, and then a bot can query this wiki and automatically provide an answer to a user who asks a question that has been asked before. So it uses some sort of machine learning algorithms to try and
Heck yeah.
recognize the question and see if it's already been answered, and then automatically provide the closest match if available. So I know it should be possible, at least based on what he told me. I'll reach out to him, ask him if he can maybe provide some guidance or some links.
Yeah, the first thing is just to get all these questions and their answers that you provide into organized same spot. Because right now a lot of information is, I'm not going to say it's going lost. It's still in the chat, but like getting all of that answers and questions out of the chat into a structured format, that's an actual job. That's what someone has to do full time for quite a while to just get that together. So the sooner you can get something like that going, the more time you'll save.
Do you have any suggestions where those questions and answers would be best stored? For example, GitHub discussions, Q&A, and would that be a good source for the bot, or that's something you want to look into?
That's what I'm looking into. If we can find a bot that can actually, write and store data or read from that, then yes, that'll be the easiest. Otherwise, I guess a local storage on your side would be the best option as the second option, just to get it somewhere.
Yeah.
For now. So I'll look into those two things. But if anybody has any suggestions, that'll be super cool. And then I can get this sorted quickly.
Awesome.
Those switch cases, how difficult will they be to configure as an input and evaluate and out? How would they handle it? Exactly the same as what C# does it?
No, not exactly as C#. The implementation is actually quite straightforward. Let me just walk you through it quickly. So here, let's say I have three cases. The most simplest of conditions are, of course, Boolean literals. So like this. But since these are JavaScript expressions, they could also be something like, let's say I have a variable called variable1 with let's say it's a numeric value. This is a Z index issue here. Let me see if I can just hit enter. Okay, so let's say I have a variable 1. Then here I could say variable 1 equals 3, for example, or 2, or 100. Then depending on the value of the variable, when this activity executes, one of these will, or multiple of these will evaluate to true. That's really all there is to it. And if you look at the implementation here, so here is the execute method of the switch activity. It will find a matching case, which is a private method here. For that, it uses the expression evaluator, and then basically for each case, which is an array of switch case objects here, which has the label, the condition which represents the JavaScript expression in this example. Each one will be evaluated, but as soon as it finds a match, that switch case will be returned as a matching case, and then its associated activity will be scheduled. But this may change if we introduce that behavior setting or the mode setting of a first match or match any setting. But that's all there is to it.
Then one more question regarding the switch. So if, let's say, the parent activity or event block is active and it evaluates, and this event block has a switch with 3 results. One of those results are depending on a parallel or child process to come back, but it doesn't come back in time. But another line evaluates to true. It fires off. Will this activity be able to activate it again once the child process or sub process returns with the result? Not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, so help me understand the structure. So maybe we can build out a small prototype workflow just to have something to look at.
Okay. So that's to make it simple. Actually, my first question should be, before we test that, currently Elsa can start a parallel or a sub process and then wait for a result to come back.
So Elsa 3 at this point doesn't have a notion of sub processes, but maybe I'm not sure what you mean exactly.
Parallel process is also fine then. So a sub process would be, terminology. How about a child process that you've started? Fire and forget. Well, not actually forget. Actually fire and wait.
Okay, so maybe like a background task. Would that be an example? So let's say you have a workflow that represents an orchestration of tasks to execute. So it schedules some job, it executes, and then I getcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So actually anything that waits.
Mm-hmm.
So if that thing waits, let's say 10 seconds even, but one of the other results equates to true immediately, just based on the context of the workflow.
Uh-huh.
What will happen if that, task that's awaited for hits the switch case? Will it fire off that specific line just because it's waiting for that, or will it reevaluate and start a
I
new?
see. Yeah, okay. So the way it works right now, let's say we have case one and it does something simple like it writes some text, and then we have the second case, and here we are gonna do some work. And in this case it's a delay which could be seen as a background job, because this what will happen here. This will actually cause the workflow to become suspended unless there's other work executing. So let me just add another task here. So now this one is a write line. Oh, it doesn't update this thing. That's a bug. So this is a write line. This is some process, a job or whatever, and this is another write line. So let's imagine all three cases will match. So they all evaluated true. That means the write line will execute, the delay will execute, but it will schedule a timer using quartz.net, and this one will execute. So all three will have executed, but this switch contains a delay activity or a job activity that causes the workflow to be suspended. There's no more work to be done, and there's a blocking activity in the form of the delay in this example. Now the workflow instance gets suspended until the timer triggers or the job finishes. Then the workflow instance will be resumed. This switch will not evaluate case 1, 2, and 3 anymore. It will continue with whatever workflow is going on here. So maybe it continues with this work, another write line or some other stuff, doesn't matter. Once this case is done, then whatever comes next after the switch continues. So to recap, when this switch, let me add this one here. So let's say this is the start of the workflow, goes into the switch. 1, 2, and 3 will execute, but in 2 we know there's a delay. So that means the entire workflow is waiting on that delay in this example. Once that resumes, control yields back to the switch, which is not gonna evaluate all the conditions anymore. It already did that, but it's gonna complete itself, which then instructs the containing flowchart, which is also an activity to schedule the next one because of this connection here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, and of course here I'm using the sequential switch, but we of course with the flow switch, instead of having these embedded things, it would be, well, let me just take the if else as a simplified example of a switch. So this decision here. So here we don't have nest activities, but just two outcomes. And here we could have a delay. This is not a perfect example, of course, because here either it's true or it's false. But if we imagine for a second that this is a switch or flow switch and both evaluated true, then it works as follows. First, this one, well, we don't know which to evaluate first, but let's say this one evaluates first. It will write a line and then execute this one. And then it will schedule the delay, wait for an X number of seconds or minutes or days or weeks or years. And once this is done, then this one will evaluate. And that will then finish the workflow. But a question for you, we had a discussion last week about the following scenario. Let's say have it like this, and then we do it like this. We'll place this one. It's about this scenario. So notice this. We have a starting write line, and then it has two connections. One connection goes to this write line, and another connection goes to the delay. So as a user, what would you expect to happen? Would you expect for this write line to execute once or twice when this workflow executes?
On my phone, I can't really see from which side the flow starts. Is it
Oh,
from the left?
yeah, from left to
Sure.
right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then you asked if the top right line is going to execute twice
Yeah, this one indeed.
or once.
Or once.
Well, currently, depending on the time, let's see if there's a delay. I'd say it's going to execute twice, unless you have had a custom data field or variable that you could set. But currently, it just looks like it's going to execute twice.
Okay, and then if I do it like this, no delay, just all write lines. So this one, and then this one.
I think that still creates two tasks for the final write line. I think, unless there was a join that makes the flow one before it hits that write line, I think it's going to execute twies.
Yeah.
For me,
So
it's an implicit fork and join.
yeah, for you it's yeah, exactly. So in this is what we've discussed last time. I wasn't sure. To me, it made sense as a developer because I implemented the engine, and if I follow the logic, the way this works, it schedules write line and write line as well. Both of them, and they both connect to this one. So to me, it made sense that write line executes twice. I can also see from a user that maybe doesn't make sense for this to execute twice because you would think this is some sort of a join indeed. In Elsa 2, we implement this using an explicit fork and an explicit join activity.
Yeah,
So then we
that makes sense.
yeah, but Mohammed, I don't know if he's on the call. He is. Yeah, so he did a little bit of research on Azure Data Fabric. Let's see where it is. Here, no, maybe here. No.
It's on maintainer. It's on maintainer for topic.
Maintenance. Here, maintainers. Right, yeah. So Mohammed did a little bit of research and he noticed that when this flowchart executes, both of these execute in parallel, seemingly. I'm not convinced yet they actually are executed in parallel. I will look into that. But regardless, the delete activity executes once. So this is the flow. So I guess it goes from data flow 1, so from bottom to top, this one first, then copy data 1, copy data 1, copy 1, this one, and then delete once. So somehow here is
So,
an implicit join.
so the thing is that I've seen, making a product for an end user of, I don't know what your target market is for skills, but making it for, more user friendly means more people want to use it. So from that perspective, if you would make all of these events inherently a join, okay, well, not all of them. I mean, it can't take all of these things in consideration if you run a parallel line or, like I said earlier, a sub process. Yeah, it's a bit difficult, but the engines I've worked with somehow got it right to all event blocks are inherently joins. So if you connect 3 lines to one event, it'll know that it needs to wait for these lines.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Which engines do you have experience with, Cody?
K2 workflow and Nintex, and then a little bit of Microsoft's Power Flow. Well,
Okay.
the whole, is it called Powerhouse? I think Power Apps with that flow.
Mm-hmm.
That one is the closest to this, though. The other ones are meant for, to a certain degree, to an end user that has no coding experience whatsoever. And if you put down an event and you connect 3 lines to that event, for instance, that event will not fire off 3 times unless you explicitly tell it to. So I don't know how to translate that just yet in a better way, but that's what it comes down to, is that it's more work to make the event fire off more than once, where you'd expect an end user of a very low skill to always just connect things and go, this will be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I was working on that, and maybe we should also look at the example that I created to have this discussion. Because I thought in the beginning as well, yes, let's do just this and make a default in behavior. But you can run in so many different scenarios where you have joins that aren't coming from the same source eventually, or loop half of the things loop back. And what do you do then? Or have 4 each loops. There are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration, whether or not you want to proceed or have to wait for the sub processes or the activities that were scheduled to wait for them all, or just to proceed. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting discussion. What is the default value or the default behavior, and if we allow it to be overwritten or not.
Do you have an example ready that you prepared to share, or do you want to do it some other time?
No, I have one ready, or that is the one that I used till now. Maybe I can share that. Yeah. Never shared something with Discord, so that's going to be fun.
Sorry, I joined late. Maybe I missed some of the discussion. Because also I think the looping is where things get complicated. In the case of Azure Data Factory, they don't allow loops at all. That also I have checked.
I have one question, Mohammed, about this example you shared with the looping, like here. Of course, in this case, it doesn't seem clear to me what would be the starting activity. Do you know how Data Fabric knows which one to start with if you do it like this?
You're not sharing your screen right now.
Sorry. Let me share.
Yeah. So it should pick one that doesn't have a dependency. I think in this example, there is no starting activity at all.
Right. But, so let's say you do have a starting activity, let's say here, and then it goes to this one, and then does it then allow the loop? Or then
it just doesn't allow the loops at all. Okay. And for obvious reason, because things become very complicated. Because I think a simple implementation is just to keep some flag for each activity, whether it's executed or not. If it is already executed and again it gets triggered from another branch, you can just skip it because you can maintain that I have already executed. But if you have a loop, then it becomes really complicated how to clear that flag or how to know from where you are arrived.
Yeah, exactly. Because in a loop, you do want it to execute multiple times.
Yeah. So there are some trade-offs.
Yeah, I looked into that, and I think I have that basically in an algorithm to determine that. But let me share ones that I've used to. So basically, this is the flow that I use to determine. Okay, is my algorithm okay? And this is in a BPMN notation from Kawimo. Is it? Maybe I make it a bit bigger. So you have a starting point and an end point, and you have a couple of activities. The intent of the activities doesn't really matter, except for this one. This is a loop. And so when you start, the first one is quite obvious. This one will get executed. And then immediately it forks into two. So A2 and A6. And A2 is a loop over a collection, which let's say has 2 items in it. And for each item, it's gonna activate A3 and A4. And then the tricky thing is, what is A5 gonna do? If you would say wait for all, does that mean that it needs to wait for all the items that are executed for A3 and A4 in the loop of A2?
I think it should be A3, 4, and sorry, my phone, I can't see the bottom one. Is it a 6?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 6.
That's my opinion, because it should be aware of the lines that's directly connected to it. If it should wait for something as far as the loop, I think the loop should have an ID and a value, and in I5 you can configure it to only continue once A2 is satisfied. Like I said, extra
Yeah, this is interesting.
extra steps
At
to
some
make this
point,
happen.
A5 will execute, right? So A3 executed, A4, A6, and A5 continues. Then in the Q1 or whatever that is, it goes back through C9, and then the loop executes again. But at this time, A6 will not execute again. Should A5 still be waiting for A6?
Exactly. Or just say, okay, A6, it has been done, it has returned back, all the A3 and 4s are executed again. Now A5 can continue, even though that the A6 didn't trigger anymore, which makes sense because you designed it in a way that only A2 gets triggered once again.
Exactly. Sorry, Cody, I think I cut you off when you were talking about some setting on A5.
That's all I had to say. I mean, I can elaborate further on that, but I just also noticed that I don't think that's currently a thing that Elsa does.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, so I just sorry. I still have a lot to catch up on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. So this is the nice thing about Elsa 3. We get to, well, it is already a major refactoring. In fact, it's a rewrite from Elsa 2. So it's completely different. So we have this opportunity to make it as perfect as possible and to as close as other engines out there as possible. So it's good to try and identify what the big players are doing and learn from them.
If I can make a suggestion to what could really change how all of this works. If you allow custom variables to exist as global to the whole workflow, and you can associate those variables to any of these events, those events can interact with that variable the same way any kind of a loop interacts with its iterator or an array or whichever it reads from. Then you get to control these loops a little bit better, I think. Then you can have your I++. You can have all those things configured, hard-coded. For instance, if you would configure number A5, you'd assign loop count or just count to it. And you say count plus plus. And on Q1, you can then say, is I equal to 10? If it is, go to E1. If not, follow C9 back to A2. Then the loop will sort itself out on run.
Yeah, that's true. But the difficulty is then when you configure something that A5 needs to listen to as a variable that is global for the instance that is executing. That means whenever you go back from Q1 through C9 back to A2, you have to be aware of that and that you then somehow reset something in order to continue. Otherwise, it will, for instance, in the first iteration, have that variable set to 2 because it has 2 iterations. And when you go back, it is already set to 2, and when it comes to A5, it's already at 4 at that point. So there is a lot of, it's more like programming than that you're designing a workflow. And I was thinking of this A5 to have like a property to say how it should continue. And it could be like whenever something activates it, just execute it. Always execute, basically. And then you have the option to say wait all, which makes it wait for all the events to complete, which makes for each iteration of A2, it will wait as well. So if this has 2 items, then A3 and A4 are going to be executed twice, and it will wait both of them are finished, including A6. And then it will continue. And the last option is wait any, which makes it like, okay, the first arrive, I will execute. And even though these aren't finished, whenever one gets finished and hits the A5, it will not execute A5 again because it was already executed. But then the tricky part is, okay, what if after the first time you go up, what do you then do the second time? Is that then re-evaluating the A5? And does it exclude A6 as well? That needs to be executed as well? Or should it say, well, A6 has been executed. The new iteration of A2 did again twice A3 and A4. So everything is executed, so I can continue once and more.
Exactly. So maybe, in my mind at least, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, is that from a user's point of view, it might be intuitive what should happen. So let me explain what I think makes sense for it to happen, and then as a separate item, we can of course talk about the technical implications on how to implement this. But to me, it seems logical that A6 executes only once, always, in this workflow from start to end. A3 and A4 will execute for each iteration of A2, which also means A5 will execute for each iteration, including Q1, and E1 will execute only once.
What do you mean with each iteration? Would A5 then be executed twice if
Yes.
A2 is going to be executed twice, or
Yes.
4 times because A3 and A4 are executed 2 times and yield to 4 times A5?
Right, so as many times as A2 executes. So if A2 executes 3 times because it has a list source or a source of 3 items, then A5 will execute 3 times.
Yeah, okay, that is an wait any.
Right, yeah, wait any on A3 and A4 and A6.
Yeah, same for me. I agree with this proposal.
Okay, cool. Okay, then I can check if that algorithm, I think it should work like that. Are there any other edge cases that we didn't think of in this model, or that we can come up with that I need to think of?
Oh, I think yes, but no, I can't think of any at this point, but probably there are edge cases we will run into.
Just one thing, currently the for each activity that we have in Elsa 3, it has the loop as a child activity. So probably we will not run into this scenario because we are not assuming that A3 and A4 are the children of A2, right?
Yeah, that's right for this one indeed. So the for each sequential activity will not have the issue because everything is contained within the body. I would totally like to support this kind of looping construct as well. So this would maybe be a flow loop, let's say, and it only loops if you explicitly loop back into it. In this example on France's screen through the C9 connection, because it loops back into it, that will then cause the iterator to proceed on to the next item. So if the first item was 1, the second item is then 2, and then it will, schedule the next activities.
So probably it's like a while loop.
Yeah, exactly.
While the condition Q1 is active, then it will. Yeah.
Good point. Could be anything. Could be a list. Could be an expression like a for I equals 0 while it's less than 10, for example, or indeed a while loop, or maybe even a do while. I don't know. I don't know if we need to model them as separate activities, but we should support all of these constructs.
So the looping here is happening because of Q1, because of we are returning back to A2.
Exactly.
But A2 itself is a normal activity, or it also has its own loop. That is what I'm trying to.
I would say it's one of the looping constructs that we have. So it's either a while, it's a for, or it's a for each. And the for each would use a list. But it would only move on to the next item if you actually schedule execution or activate it through the C9 connection in this example.
Okay, but in that case, I think we need to put some validation. We need to ensure that some activity at some point is coming back to it.
Well,
otherwise,
I think it's fine if you use it, but you don't connect back into it. I don't think that has to be a problem.
But how do you know then which one is part of the loop and which one is a continuation of the workflow?
So I think the activity itself, of course, it is a loop, and the first time you enter through C2, it will evaluate its condition. So it will take the first item of the list in the case of a for each construct. Then it will go on to C4 and C5 all the way to Q1. And then it's up to Q1 whether it's going to move back through C9 into the looping construct. If you remove C9, nothing bad should happen. It will just go straight to E1, and that's fine. It's not a very sensible workflow, because why use a looping construct if you're not going to loop back into it? But I'm not sure I see the point of adding validation to that by having the user be required to loop back into it if they don't want to, because it's not going to break anything.
But if it was that this one, the A2, is a loop and it has a workflow inside that only iterates over the items for the flow inside of it, that means that this one only gets triggered once, the C4 and C5.
Yeah, correct.
Regardless how many items there are in A2. So basically it doesn't matter if this is a loop or if it's just a simple activity, because it's going to be, regardless of what it does inside, it will execute only the outcome once.
That's right. It would work. It would be the same for an if activity, or indeed even if it's a write line activity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay, that makes it a bit easier.
The only thing
Still, we have
say on
to
this-
think about the C9 back, but that's going to work then. It makes it easier for me now.
The only thing I can say is, how bothered are you with what the end user can do with this? I mean, with other workflow engines, if you do it incorrectly, you make a runaway loop and it goes until someone kills the process.
Yeah,
that's the
never
risk
happened.
they carry. So that's the risk that they carry. If anything, I mean, there could be certain checks to let a user know, be careful, this thing might run away, and that's enough. If that's not a concern, then I would say the only thing here that actually has to even care from where or what line or what event it comes from is the final one. It should just check how many times should this loop run.
Yeah, but the problem doesn't lie in how many times the loop must run. It needs to think about this. Take for example that A3 and A4 are basically approval user tasks, and the two people can approve it. Which let's make it a user task, and this is also a user task. What this is gonna send the mail back to the customer and say you are approved.
Okay.
What you need to then be configured, like this is the manager that says always approve, and one or two other employees need to approve as well. What you don't want to have is that whenever A2 is executed and A3 says approve and it sends the confirmation to the customer, whenever A4 approves as well, that another approval is sent to the customer. So you have to be in control of when to send this. Either always, either
I think
any of those.
any event block needs a preceding rule. I think all of them do.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you fully.
Oh, sorry. I think all events require a preceding rule. Like by default, it would want all direct connected lines to equate to true. Then it fires it unless you specify and or.
But that means that both of A3 and A4 needs to approve before you can continue on A5. You can't make it an or in this case.
I mean, why can't you say A5 can only fire if A3 equals to true, or A4 equals to true, and A6 needs to true?
Yeah, it makes sense in the case of use task, but what if it is an action that doesn't hold any result? Not like an acceptance of a user task, but just a call to a service or something.
If it fails that service, then the line connecting that activity and A5 shouldn't equate to true. Then we know there's a problem and it won't fire.
Okay.
I think from an implementation point of view, what we can do is that we just need to keep a flag for each activity, whether it's executed or not. But then the extra thing that we need to do, for example, when you loop back to A2, then we need to clear the flag for all the depending activities all the way. So first pass, we will flag that A6 is completed, and it will remain completed. And then once we reach A5, again, it will complete. When we loop back to C9, then we need to clear A2. We need to clear E3 and 4 and 5, and then go to the next pass of execution. So we need to traverse the graph and find all the dependents and clear them each time.
Yeah, that's an interesting notion. If we maintain a flag, some one way or another, then we can have. So in Elsa 2 we have this join activity that simply looks for any activity that completed before continue, yes or no. So that's the wait any or wait all. right? And this way the user can control whether they want to wait for the first approver or wait for all approvers to approve. With this suggestion, where you can control on the, in this example, A5, for which previous activities to wait for, then you have more flexibility. Then you could indeed say, well, I want A6 to be completed and A3, for example, before continuing, just as a silly example. Yeah, and then what Mohammed says, that makes sense. That could probably work.
Just one thing. For me as a user, I would like to see directly if I want to wait for all events or not. So I think we have to choose a standard. For example, we have to wait for all previous events. And if you want, for example, to wait for any of C6 or C7, we have to add another shape to wait for any. Then link this new shape to A5.
What do you mean by shape?
Yeah, the activity. Sorry.
Okay, so the activity would have a different visual representation depending on its wait mode, let's say.
Because if we fill in A5 the logic of I want to wait for C6 and C7 or C11, it's as a user I can see this directly.
And how would you see this as a user directly? What visual would you expect?
Visual would be to add a join for between C6 and C7 before A5 and say, okay, the standard is we wait always for all events. And if you want to wait for any of previous events, you have to add a join shape.
So you're proposing to have an explicit join activity.
Yeah. Or yes.
Yeah.
But
It is
maybe
actually the standard in the BPMN to have it like this, and you have this. Basically, when you have a fork, you also have an implicit join that is related to this. And even if you have multiple ones, like this, make it pretty. If you have like so, you want to have another fork that you even have to do it like this way and have an explicit join specifically for that one. So each fork needs to have a counterpart in the join. That's the BPMN recommended notation.
It would be convenient to have, because this way we can control whether we want to wait for any or all previously executed activities.
Yeah, I don't necessarily, if you teach people BPMN and they start working on it, it's the thing that they do always wrong because it's not intuitive.
Yeah, that's true. So it's easy for us to implement, but more complicated for the users. And the other way around, if we make it easy for the users, more challenging for us to get it the way we want
they
to.
will.
Sorry to interject. My phone's battery is about to go, so I'm gonna bid you guys adieu. Thank you for letting me join. This was very cool.
No worries. Thank you for joining, Cody. Hopefully see you next week.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye.
Yeah.
Let's give it another thought. Let's get back to that on next week or something like that. And I will work a bit more on. It was 2872. I will add my thoughts and the algorithm concepts in that issue. That was about parallel programming.
Yeah, sounds wonderful.
Parallel execution, and then we can have a look at that next time.
Yeah. Great.
And for the parallel programming, if you see the timestamp in the Azure Data Factory, you can see that the starting time was for the both activities was the same exact time.
Oh, that's true parallel execution.
Yes. I don't know how to manage that, but yeah.
Yeah, all right. So lots of food for thought, I'd say.
Yeah.
All right, this has been great. Very instructive. Thanks, guys, for all the input and the work. Let's indeed give it some more thought and circle back next week.
Thank you. And for me, we'll see you more in 3 weeks after my holidays. But I will try to think about a new feature and something on the beach.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to do that while running? Okay. Well, enjoy your run.
Thank
Hope
you.
it's not too hot for you.
Yeah, I hope. Thank you.
Okay.
And have a good week.
Thanks, everyone.
You too.
Take care.
Thank
you.
Have a good night. Take care. Bye.